Is Snoopy racist? No. No, he can't be racist. There must be something wrong with my thumbnail. What? Snoopy's not racist. Unless... No, he can't be. He can't be racist. Or is he? I'm not gonna give you the history lesson on Charles Schulz. He was a great guy, a cartoonist, and very much not a racist. But fictional characters don't always agree with their authors. Sometimes an author will include a character who has opinions that are vastly different from their own, as we may see here. It's our responsibility, as consumers of the media, to judge each character on their own merits. So that brings us around to Snoopy. Is he racist? It's hard to say for certain. I mean, on the one hand, Snoopy was a black and white beagle. The mixed heritage would imply that he shouldn't be racist. Also, he was based on Schulz's real-life dog, Spike, and there's no evidence that Spike was racist either. The jury's still out on you, Cactus Joe. But hold on. Where are these accusations of Snoopy's racism even coming from? It all comes down to this holiday special, a Charlie Brown Thanksgiving. Peppermint Patty invites herself, Marcy, and Franklin, the only black character in the Peanuts crew, over to Charlie Brown's house for Thanksgiving dinner. So far, pretty innocent, right? Wrong. Take a look at the seating chart. For some reason, all of the white kids are sitting on one side of the table and Franklin is by himself on the other side of the table. And I know the Welcome Home Franklin special on Apple Plus is supposed to rectify this issue, but frankly, I don't trust Apple products. I don't use them, okay? So we're gonna stick with the source material for this one, okay? Okay. So who's to blame for this segregation? We know the creator wasn't racist. Franklin was Charles Schulz's bold and shameless integration of a black character into an all-white cast. Why would he go through all the trouble to integrate a character and then immediately segregate them once they finally got to the table? It just doesn't really make sense. So if Charles Schulz doesn't take the blame for this seating chart, then who does? Well, let me ask you this. Who set the table? That's right, Snoopy is the one who put everyone's plates out, everyone's napkins out. He prepared the food. In a way, he's the guy in charge of this feast. And beyond that, Snoopy is the one who sabotaged Franklin's chair, wrestling it, breaking its legs before Franklin even gets a chance to sit in it. If anyone's racist here, it's gonna be him, right? After all, he did make the seating chart. But see, this is where everyone gets it wrong. There was no seating chart. Look at this table. There are more than enough seats for the 7 of them. So these kids walk outside and they choose their own seats. And is it a little weird that all of them choose to sit on the side of the table that Franklin is not sitting on? Maybe a little bit. But there's actually a reason for it. You see, these kids were not guided by their own impulses. No. They were guided by something much stronger. They were guided by fate. Now that sounds silly at first, but hear me out. In order for the plot to function, these characters need to be sitting in certain places relative to each other. Linus, for example, he's the character who will volunteer to say grace when nobody else will. They weren't planning on doing grace. In fact, if Peppermint Patty hadn't brought it up, they might have just gone on and eaten their food. As the camera zooms out, it's clear that Linus is in the correct spot to say his prayer. If he were sitting anywhere else at that table, the framing would have just been awkward. Meanwhile, we have Peppermint Patty. She's the instigator, the antagonist of this episode, and the entire rest of the seating arrangement revolves around her. She has to be next to Snoopy so that we, as the audience, can see her reaction to the weird Thanksgiving food. She has to be next to Charlie Brown so she can complain to him about the food, and subsequently hurt his feelings. Then we have Marcy, who has to call Peppermint Patty out for her rotten behavior. Marcy, therefore, has to sit somewhere where she can have this direct conversation with Peppermint Patty, preferably one with multiple camera angles. Franklin, quite frankly, doesn't contribute to this plot in any meaningful way. Is this the DEI conservatives are so scared of? And because he doesn't bring anything to the table, Franklin is sitting on the opposite side of it, purposefully not getting in the way of Peppermint Patty's drama. And actually, by sitting at the worst seat at the table, Franklin is actually giving us something. A funny little visual gag for when the camera's pointing towards him, which is not very often, but he is contributing. So I hope you understand that these characters didn't choose their seats. These characters were guided by fate to the one seat in which they could best fulfill their role for this story. Except for one. There's one character who, like Franklin, does not play an active role in this scene. In fact, this character doesn't even have any dialogue. The blocking dictates that this character should be sitting next to Franklin on the quiet side of the table, and yet this character refuses to do so. This character is actively fighting against fate to sit on the crowded side of the table, and thus this is the only character who actively chooses not to sit next to Franklin. The character, of course, is Sally. Now I know what you're thinking. You think that it's not fair. Sally is sitting next to Linus. That's her sweet Babu. Where else would she sit? But I want you to look again at the seating chart. Linus is at the head of the table. This means that Sally could sit next to him on either side, and yet she chooses the side with all the other white kids. And this is consistent characterization from her. From the very beginning of this episode, she's acting like a little bit of a Karen, complaining about the holidays. But then she mentions this essay she has to write. She says it's about a guy named Stanley Miles, but she's just a kid. She got the names flipped around. What she's actually doing is writing a report on Miles Stanley. Now, I didn't know who Miles Stanley was at first, so like any good researcher, I Googled it. And as it turns out, Stanley Miles is a NASCAR engineer. Now this should raise some eyebrows. You see, NASCAR is a sport where people race their cars. But the question is, what sort of class is Sally taking that requires her to study NASCAR engineers? A class about racing, for example? And what do you call someone who studies racing? That's right, Sally is a racist. To be fair to Sally, she is just a kid, just a 5-year-old girl in a predominantly white neighborhood. She hasn't had a chance to critically examine her biases. But I think the thing that bothers me most is just the lack of accountability. 51 years later, she still hasn't been called out for this behavior. This should have been a teachable moment for her, but without any positive adult role models in her life, I worry that it's going to grow into something a little bit more extreme. But at least Sally was actually there. Lucy didn't even bother showing up.